So all of the effects, the credibility, all of that, how much of that do you think was planned beforehand, and how much of that do you think was an unintended effect on America?
That's a very good question. I think much of it is unintended. I think that the base reason was the anti-communism of the people of the day, that they saw Kennedy as a traitor.
Yeah.
I mean, one of Kennedy's last acts as president was to order the head of NASA to explore having a joint moon mission with the Soviet Union. So this whole thing about we beat the Russians to the moon, you know, and that was Kennedy's dream, that's false. Kennedy's dream was to have a joint mission with the Russians. Well, to certain sectors of American society at this time, this is treason. To make peace with the Russians, our mortal communist enemy. So I think most of it was just an immediate, we must stop Kennedy from making peace with the Russians. They used people with hatred of Kennedy from the beginning, anti-Castro Cubans, as a triggerman. They didn't care. They used political opportunists, Lyndon Baines Johnson. He didn't care. He had no ideological bent one way or the other. He just wanted to be president. Okay, then there are other more subtle things. People were going to make a lot of money. Get a lot of money made in weapons and war and armaments. People go along. So I think a lot of it was unintended consequences. You know, the net ends up getting spread larger and larger and larger. People, you know, are forced to lie about things, you know, and here's where we're at.
Yeah, right. So do you think if the situation presented itself, maybe today, for example, Obama making peace with, say, North Korea, that's extreme, but something of that nature, do you think that assassination of this type could happen today?
That's a very good question. I think that really the scope of discretion that the president has these days is much less. He's much more hemmed in by the national security bureaucracy that surrounds him. You know, back in the 1960s was a much simpler time. Things could be done much easier. The federal government was much smaller. The intelligence community was much smaller. Now it's just so huge. I mean, the CIA and the military have bases in 200 countries around the globe. So I think the scope of action is less. Assassination is kind of out. You know, in the late 60s when Bobby Kennedy got assassinated, and then there was attempts on George Wallace, and the Black Panthers all got assassinated. Martin Luther King got assassinated. I think the winds kind of shifted a little bit. Could it happen today? You know, I guess so. Sure, it could. You know, I mean, they made assassination attempts on Reagan. You know, that's 20 years ago already, right? So, but right now you don't see anybody standing up bucking the winds. You know, Obama is elected because of the unjust war in Iraq, right? But that unjust war in Iraq 6 years later, right, is still going.
Yeah.
We still have troops in Afghanistan. Al Qaeda is still the enemy, right? So, you know, who knows?
Okay. Do you have any closing questions?
That's about it. That's good.
Okay. Do you have any more thoughts that you wanted to add?
Well, I mean, there's lots of thoughts. I mean, in my opinion, democracy, when history is written 500 or 600 or 700 years from now, and they look at the demise of America, that will be traced right back to November 22nd, 1963, when you know, a small group of Americans took over the government, and everybody else stood and let it happen. And I mean, look where we are now. I mean, I think if the founding fathers saw the way that America is run today, they'd all be rolling over in their graves. You know, so those are my final thoughts.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure, boys. Good job.